mind. This is Sulfur Salon, and we're just getting started.
We know the silence has been deafening. Forgive us, but the forge has been burning white hot. The entire crew, we've been locked away, working day and night, conjuring a tempest. Prepare yourselves, because next month, Sulfur Editions unleashes a global inferno. We're talking the second Egyptian book collection, raw and untamed, straight from the heart of the Nile, and that's just the spark. 2 new collections, forged in the concrete jungles of New York and Chicago, whispered in the ancient streets of Bucharest and beyond. This is an international storm, a literary apocalypse, and you're standing right in the eye of it.
But that's not all. We've been sharpening our blades, expanding our reach, evolving. Our facilities, our distribution, everything's been upgraded. And for those of you with a taste for the sonic, Sulfur Music Production is cooking up something different. Dive into our pages, explore our website, and see what we've been brewing. Plus, get ready, Egypt, because Sulfur Salon is coming home, with Egyptian versions and a series of literary translation workshops to ignite the very soul of our literary scene. Now, tonight, we're diving deep. This is an exceptional episode, a spotlight on a recent release that's been shaking the foundations. Half-Bird Sans Frontières by the visionary Moamen Samir. This isn't just a book, it's a journey, a descent, a revelation. So settle in, sharpen your senses, and let's explore the uncharted territories of the mind. This is Sulfur Salon, and we're just getting started.
Sometimes you read a poem, and it doesn't just describe something like a forest, but you can almost feel it growing around you.
Like it's taking root in your imagination.
Yeah, exactly. Like the words are building a whole world right there in your mind. Well, that's the kind of power we're dealing with today as we dive into the work of Egyptian poet Moamen Samir. Specifically, his collection, Half-Bird Without Frontiers.
Really evocative title, isn't it?
It is, and the poems inside definitely live up to it. I mean, we're talking philosophical landscapes, architectural poems, a whole exploration of what it means to be human.
And through this very distinct lens of surrealism and symbolism, it's not your typical poetry reading experience.
Definitely not. So that's our mission today, right? To figure out what Samir is saying with these poems, how he's saying it, and why it matters.
Exactly, to unpack the layers of meaning and philosophy woven into this collection.
And for this deep dive, we've got a few things to help us along. We have the book itself, Half-Bird Without Frontiers, fresh off the press just this January.
Beautiful book, too, with these amazing artworks by Gada Kamal.
They really add another dimension to the poems, don't they?
Absolutely. And we also have some introductory material, like the background on Samir himself and the influences shaping his work.
So this deep dive, it's all for you, the listener. We want to make sure we're not just throwing around big concepts, but really breaking them down so that everyone can appreciate the genius of Moamen Samir. And speaking of Samir, let's start with him. Who is this guy?
Well, we know he was born in Egypt back in November of 1975. The Sulfur introduction even gives us the exact date, November 15th.
Very specific.
It is. But more importantly, we need to understand where he fits into the world of poetry. He's considered a central figure in what's called the 90s generation of Egyptian modernist poetry.
Which in itself is interesting because that label already suggests a departure from the traditional.
Right, because what does it even mean to be a modernist poet in the 90s? Well, the L'Auteur section, which is fascinating, by the way, describes this generation as postmodern. And in the world of poetry, that signals a break from those grand narratives and strict forms that characterized earlier modernism.
So it's like modernism 2.0, right?
You could say that.
Yeah.
It's more fragmented, more ironic, more focused on individual experience. So when we talk about Moamen Samir, we're talking about someone who is pushing the boundaries of what poetry can be.
And he's not just writing a poem here and there. I mean, this guy is prolific. The French bio mentions 22 collections of prose poetry alone.
And the English intro ups that number to 35 books total. Poetry, theater, critical essays, he's done it all.
Which tells you something about his commitment to language and ideas, right?
Absolutely. He's clearly deeply engaged with the world on multiple levels, using language as his primary tool. And it's not just Egypt paying attention. His work has been translated to a bunch of languages, English, French, even more.
So this is a voice that's resonating far beyond his own culture, which makes sense when you actually dive into the themes he explores. And one thing that hits you right away when you read Half-Bird Without Frontiers is this dreamlike, surreal atmosphere. It's everywhere.
Right, there's this constant blurring of the lines between reality and dreams, waking life, and the subconscious. You start questioning what's real and what's imagined.
And the intro notes point out these recurring images, almost like symbols. Ancestors, forests, birds, shadows, they pop up again and again. What do you make of those? What are they trying to tell us?
Well, they're definitely not just random. Each one seems to carry a certain weight, a deeper meaning that adds to this surreal quality. It's like Samir is using the language of dreams to make us confront the fragility of our own perceptions.
Like he's saying, hey, what you think is real, maybe not so much.
Exactly. And these motifs, they're not just decorative. There's a philosophical depth to them. For example, the ancestors could represent that unseen connection we all have to the past, how it shapes our present whether we realize it or not. And the forests, those could symbolize our inner lives, the unexplored wilderness within each of us.
I like that. And what about the birds?
The birds are interesting. They could represent freedom, the soul, those fleeting moments of insight or inspiration that we sometimes glimpse. They're elusive, always in motion, never fully grasped. And the shadows, well, they could represent the hidden parts of ourselves or the uncertainties that lurk beneath the surface of things, the things we don't want to see or maybe can't fully grasp.
And then there's memory. It plays such a huge role in this collection, but it's not like a straightforward memory, is it? It's more fragmented, more like pieces of a dream.
Yeah, it's not a chronological recounting of events. It's more like these echoes and images, these flashes of emotion that suddenly surface.
Yeah.
And it makes you question the whole idea of how we remember, how we piece together our own past.
Because if our memories are so fragmented, how reliable can they be?
Exactly. And Samir seems to be suggesting that our memories are less about objective truth and more about an emotional truth. It's the feeling, the atmosphere, the essence of the past that matters, not necessarily the accuracy of the details. And what's even more fascinating is how he weaves in these personal memories with elements of cultural history, mythology, almost like he's saying that individual memory is always intertwined with the larger collective memory.
It's like our personal stories are just threads in a much bigger tapestry.
Precisely. And then there's this whole exploration of identity and this feeling of alienation that permeates the collection. The speaker in many of these poems seems to be struggling with their place in the world, constantly searching for meaning, for belonging, but often feeling lost and disconnected. It's a very human struggle, isn't it? That desire to find our place, to feel connected to something larger than ourselves.
Absolutely. And Samir captures that struggle so beautifully, so honestly, and it really hits home in that poem, Personne ne nous attend à l'intérieur.
No one waits for us inside.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one really gets to you.
It does. The way he repeats that line, personne ne nous attend à l'intérieur, it's like this echo of existential loneliness, you know, that feeling that no matter where you go, no matter who you're with, there's still this part of you that feels utterly alone.
It speaks to the fact that even when we're surrounded by people, there's a part of us that remains fundamentally unknowable, even to ourselves. And that can be a very isolating feeling.
And it's not just feeling separate from other people, is it? There's also this interesting relationship between the body, the soul, and the natural world.
Right. There's this constant interplay, this back and forth between those elements, like the speakers existing in this in-between space. The introduction calls it a liminal space, which is a fancy way of saying that they're not fully in one realm or the other.
They're kind of straddling the line between the physical and the spiritual.
Exactly. And I think that's where a lot of the surreal imagery comes from. It's like in those moments when we're half asleep, half awake, or when we're deeply immersed in nature and lose track of ourselves, that's when these boundaries start to blur and those surreal images emerge.
Like our minds are more open to those other realms of experience when we're in that in-between state.
Exactly. And I think that's what Samir is trying to explore with these poems. Those states of consciousness, those moments when our understanding of reality shifts.
Okay, so we've talked about the themes, but what about how Samir actually constructs these poems? What are the building blocks of his poetic world?
Well, the intro emphasizes the importance of symbolism. And you see that right away. The poems are full of these recurring images. Animals like tigers, birds, fish, wolves. Then these landscapes. Forests, rivers, mountains, and there's this constant interplay between light and darkness.
It's like he's created this whole symbolic language, right? What's he saying with it?
Well, I think the power of his symbolism lies in the fact that it's multi-layered. It's not about one-to-one correspondences. A bird might symbolize freedom in one poem, but then vulnerability or the fragility of life in another. It depends on the context. And these natural landscapes, they often act as mirrors for the speaker's inner state. So you get this sense of the outer world reflecting the inner world, and then the light and dark imagery that's often tied to those fundamental dualities: knowledge and ignorance, life and death, hope and despair.
So he's playing with these really big universal themes, but he's doing it through these very specific images and symbols.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes his work so compelling. It's accessible on an emotional level because of the imagery, but then it also has this intellectual depth that invites you to dig deeper.
And another thing that really pulls you into these poems is that first-person perspective that he uses almost exclusively. You're right there with the speaker experiencing their thoughts, their emotions, their struggles. It feels very intimate.
And that intimacy is crucial because it allows us to connect with the speaker on a human level. Even when they're grappling with these big abstract ideas, we're not just observers, we're participants in their journey. And that's what makes the philosophical ideas hit home. We're not just reading about them, we're feeling them.
It's like we're right there in their head with them. Okay, so let's get specific. Let's talk about some of the individual poems that really stand out. Let's start with Tigres, Arbre et Souvenir. In English, that's tigers, tree, and memory. And right away, we're thrown into the situation where the speaker is falling into a trap. What do you think is going on there?
On one level, it's about vulnerability, being caught off guard, facing some unknown danger. But then there's the tree, which offers a kind of refuge. The speaker embraces it, seeking comfort, connection. And then there's the presence of the ancestral soul, reaching out a hand. It's like the past is offering some kind of guidance or protection.
And there's that beautiful contrast between the tortoise slowly advancing and the falcon suddenly vanishing.
Yeah, that really highlights the tension between the weight of memory and the fleeting nature of time. And then, of course, there's that powerful image of the soul transforming into a bird. It's like a symbol of metamorphosis, breaking free from the limitations of the physical world or the burdens of the past.
And then you have a poem like The Lover Peasant Papyrus, which is so different in tone. It's much more celebratory, sensual. It's about love, the beauty of nature, and it's full of these images drawn from Egyptian mythology.
Yeah, it's a beautiful poem, and it definitely provides a counterpoint to some of the more melancholic poems in the collection.
Yeah.
It's grounding those big emotions like love in a very specific cultural context.
And it's interesting how Samir uses those mythological references, almost like he's weaving personal experience into a larger, almost cosmic narrative.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this poem so powerful. It's suggesting that even the most intimate human experiences can be connected to something much greater than ourselves.
And then there's Marquis de Sade, which takes us into a whole different territory. It deals with some pretty dark themes: pain, cruelty, rebellion. It's a bit of a shocker after those other poems.
It is, but I think it speaks to the breadth of Samir's philosophical inquiry. He's not afraid to explore those darker aspects of human nature, those uncomfortable truths that we often try to avoid.
And by invoking a figure like the Marquis de Sade, he's really pushing the boundaries.
Yeah.
He's forcing us to confront those questions about freedom, transgression, the potential for both good and evil within us.
It's a challenging poem, but a necessary one. It reminds us that Samir is not just interested in exploring beauty or nostalgia. He's also grappling with those darker forces that shape our world.
Going back to Personne ne nous attend à l'intérieur for a moment, it's not just about that initial sense of isolation, is it? It also explores how we try to cope with loneliness. The speaker talks about creating imagined companions, even longing for death's embrace.
Yeah, that's one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the poem, that desperate yearning for connection, even if it means seeking solace in death. But it's also a testament to our resilience as humans, the fact that we can create these imaginary worlds, these connections, even when we feel utterly alone. It speaks to our need for love and belonging, no matter how unconventional the source.
And then there's that line about making years into joy and vaporizing sorrow. It's like a glimmer of hope, a suggestion that even in the face of despair, we still have the power to choose how we experience our lives.
It's a reminder that we're not just passive victims of our circumstances. We have agency, even if it's only in how we choose to perceive our reality.
And then we have l'annonce, which is the announcement in English. That one feels more satirical. It's talking about offering rewards for sadness and erasing complexities. What do you think Samir is saying about society there?
Well, I think it's a critique of those societal forces that try to flatten us out, to make us conform to some narrow definition of happiness. It's like he's saying that in our pursuit of a pain-free existence, we're actually losing something essential.
Like we're becoming less human, less authentic.
Exactly. And there's something really chilling about the idea of rewarding sadness, like it's some kind of commodity. It makes you question what we truly value as a society.
Okay, then there are the trois courts poems. That's 3 short poems. And they're called that for a reason. They're incredibly brief, almost minimalist in style, but they pack a punch, don't they?
They do. Each one distills a complex idea into just a few lines, and it's that brevity that makes them so powerful. The first one, for example, would suggest that inaction equals faultlessness. It's a really provocative statement.
Because on the surface, it sounds like he's saying it's better to do nothing than to risk making a mistake.
But I think it's more nuanced than that. It's making us question the nature of responsibility, the fear of failure, the tension between passivity and action.
And the second poem is so different. It's all about desire, passion. It's incredibly sensual.
Yeah, that was a celebration of the senses, the power of attraction, the unspoken language that exists between people.
And then the third one, with that image of the orphan's finger shaking a crowd, it's such a powerful visual.
It is. And it speaks to the potential for even the smallest gesture to have a ripple effect, to disrupt the status quo. It's about the power of the individual to make a difference.
The Nap of the Blind Woodman is another one that really sticks with you. It's this lament from Adam, not just about losing his childhood, but even questioning why God created him the way he did.
Yeah, that's a poem that really delves into those fundamental existential questions. The nature of creation, our relationship with the divine, the search for meaning in a world that often feels meaningless.
And that image of Adam as a blind woodman is so striking. It suggests a lack of awareness, a kind of fundamental flaw.
And by having Adam directly address God, Samir's really highlighting that tension between humanity and the divine. It's a powerful and deeply moving exploration of faith, doubt, and the search for answers.
Then there's Mirrors of a Thousand Nights, with that incredible imagery of revolving doors and mirrors. It's all about identity, illusion, the way we construct our own realities. And that line from the grandmother, "You are a son of coincidence," it's like a bomb dropping.
It is. It completely shifts our perspective.
Yes.
It suggests that so much of who we are is just random chance. It's a humbling thought, isn't it?
It is. It makes you question how much control we really have over our own destinies.
And the use of mirrors and revolving doors is brilliant. It creates this sense of disorientation, this constant shifting and reflecting. It's like our identities are fragmented, constantly being refracted through different lenses.
And lastly, there's You Are Not Mine, I Am Not Yours, which dives headfirst into the complexities of relationships. It's about dependence, the struggle for individual identity within a close connection.
Yeah, it's a really honest exploration of the push and pull that exists in any intimate relationship. The need for closeness, the fear of losing yourself in the other, the desire for both connection and autonomy. It's a universal struggle, isn't it?
It is, and it's one that Samir captures with such raw honesty and vulnerability. You can feel the tension in every line. Now, we touched on this before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. The fact that we have so many different translators involved in bringing these poems into English and French. It tells you something about the challenges of conveying the nuances of Samir's work across languages and cultures.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that translation is an art form in itself. And each translator brings their own perspective, their own understanding to the text. And that's not a bad thing. It actually enriches the collection by offering multiple interpretations, different shades of meaning. It shows that poetry can be a bridge between cultures.
And we can't forget about Ghada Kamal's artwork. We don't have the specific pieces here, but the very fact that they're included suggests another layer of dialogue with the poems.
It's like a visual counterpoint to the words, adding another dimension to the experience. And I think that interplay between the visual and the textual can really deepen our understanding of Samir's work.
It's like a conversation happening between the images and the words, each one illuminating the other.
Exactly. And it invites us to engage with the work on a more intuitive level, allowing the images and the words to resonate within us in a way that goes beyond just intellectual analysis.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Half Bird Without Frontiers, I think it's safe to say that Moamen Samir is a poet who's not afraid to ask the big questions. And he's doing it in a way that's both intellectually stimulating and emotionally engaging.
He's a true visionary. He's using language and imagery to explore those fundamental questions that we all grapple with. Memory, identity, our place in the world, the search for meaning. And he's doing it in a way that feels both ancient and utterly contemporary.
And thinking about Samir's exploration of memory and the way our personal narratives shape our realities, it makes me wonder how much of what we perceive as truth is actually just a story we're telling ourselves, and what happens when those stories start to unravel.
That's a good question. One that I think we could spend a lifetime pondering.
I think you're right. It's a question that Samir's poetry keeps asking us to consider long after we finish reading. So thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of Moamen Samir's Half-Bird Without Frontiers. We hope it sparked some new thoughts, some new questions, and maybe even a deeper appreciation for the power of poetry to illuminate the mysteries of our own existence.